And I think when I sat for my job interview at the DA's office, that's one of the questions they ask you is what sets you apart from our other applicants? And my first response is my life experience. You know, I don't know how many applicants can say that, one, I've carried so many different jobs. I've dealt with the public in so many different ways, you know, whether it be being a Miss Rodeo USA, being a local title holder in the 4-H division, you know, as a kid growing up all the way till I was 18 and graduating from 4-H, working at the different jobs that I worked. All those things gave me a tremendous ability to be able to relate to people in a different way and be able to apply experience to my caseload, which I think makes a huge difference in your ability as not just an attorney, but in your ability as a professional in any industry.
Hey y'all, and welcome. You're listening to the Cowgirl Confessions Podcast. I'm your host, Dakota Dawn Johnson, small-town cowgirl with Southern roots, blazing a trail as a Midwest ranch wife, mama, and businesswoman. The mission of Cowgirl Confessions is to share the wonderfully wild and Western life stories of cowgirls from all walks of life. We'll talk about the highs, the lows, and everything in between when it comes to navigating careers, cowboys, kids, and cattle. Legendary cowgirl Dale Evans said it best. Cowgirl is a pioneer spirit, a special brand of American courage. The cowgirl faces life head-on, lives by her own lights, and makes no excuses. Cowgirls take stands. They speak up. They defend the things they hold dear. A cowgirl might be a rancher, a barrel racer, a bull rider, or an actress, but she's just as likely to be a checker at the local Winn-Dixie, a full-time mother, a banker, an attorney, or an astronaut. If you're into wet saddle blankets, talks with God, buckets full of laughter, and the life lessons learned in the process, kick off your boots and settle in. I pray these stories encourage, empower, and give you just the leg up you need. Here's to embracing the cowgirl state of mind, no matter how wild and Western life may get along the way. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Cowgirl Confessions Podcast, y'all. I'm just so excited to have a dear friend with me today. I have Katie Woods Boggeman from Henrietta, Texas here. She is a wife, a mother of littles, an outstanding, like I said, friend of mine. And she's that business savvy friend that I'm just always so thankful to have, to be able to bounce ideas off of, and that'll just really shoot you straight and let you look at things from a different perspective. She is a former felony prosecutor for Tarrant County, and now she owns her own law practice. So I know you guys are going to enjoy getting to know her, and she's going to bring so much value to all of us today. Katie, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Like I told you, this is like the highlight of my day today. It gave me a break from some stressful legal work I'm working on.
Well, highlight of my day too. So I guess if you could, just kick off with sharing with our listeners a little bit more about yourself and kind of how you grew up, because you're in Texas now, but you started out in California.
I did. And sometimes my Texas friends and family hold that against me, but I grew up in a very small town in California. My mom and dad actually met in Southern California. My dad was retired Navy and was a lineman for Department of Water and Power. And my mom at the time was loss prevention supervisor at Sears and Roebuck, I think, when they met. And then my mom went on to do lots of things like first women county assessor in Los Angeles County, and then worked for basically what is known as welfare in California, but she ran the mental health, substance abuse, and domestic violence caseload. And I attribute a lot of things that I've been experienced or exposed to through both my parents' lifestyles or career choices. So growing up in California in a small horse ranch in a very small town. And when I say small town, where we started, it was very, very small, and it grew, and my parents moved further out, and we ended up in a town that basically just had one stop sign.
And that, for me, because I've visited California, but like I'm guilty of not thinking that there's places like that in California. Like when I say, oh, I grew up in rural Alabama, like one stop sign makes sense. But to hear you say you grew up in a place like that in California, that's just really interesting to me.
Yes. Well, so many people think of California as Los Angeles or San Francisco, San Diego, the big cities. And while those are, large portions of the state, there's so much agriculture. At least when I was growing up, there was still so much agricultural property and land in California. I mean, it's a huge state. I mean, stretches 900 plus miles from the north end to the south end. And in between, there's so much. I grew up where there was dairy farms, alfalfa farms, a lot of onions and potatoes were grown where I grew up. And it was wonderful because although I was out in the country and had that great small town country lifestyle, everything was accessible. So I could drive 45 minutes and hit the ski slopes and go snowboarding, or we could go an hour and go to the beach. And everything was so accessible in California compared to some, it's a long ways for me to go from where we live in Texas to find some place to snowboard. So I missed that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and okay, I've got to know, since you grew up in California, did you ever have any, experiences kind of with Hollywood or doing any acting or things like that?
Yes, I did. That's funny that you ask. Yes, my mom actually had a really good friend who was an animal wrangler for the movies and did some really, really famous movies, The Raven, the Canine Cop movies. He handled all the canines. And so he got me in really young with an agent, and I did a little bit of stuff here and there. It didn't take me long, especially once I became a teenager, to realize that Hollywood was a lot different than what I thought it was. It's not what you see on the big screens. There's so much more behind the scenes. And as much as I enjoyed acting, and I did theater all through high school and some in college, I just didn't enjoy what came with that world so much. It's just there's 24 hours nonstop. There's very little positivity. I mean, you might go to 100 interviews before you ever get a second call back, or maybe even a third call back. And then you go to do some readings for things that when you got the script from your agent and you read it, you thought, okay, I could do this. And then you get there and they give you a different script and you're like, wait a second, this is not what I signed up for. And I was very lucky. There's not a lot of Christian agents, but at the time I had a very Christian agent, and I could call her if it was something I was very uncomfortable with. We could call her and say, hey, when she got there, this is what happened. This is the script they gave. Katie didn't want to read, and she had no problem with it. So that was really a blessing, because that's not always the case. And sometimes, especially youngsters, get yourselves in positions because we don't know any better. You don't want to be blackballed, and they're afraid to say, wait a second, this is not for me, and walk away, because they may not get called back for anything, or they may not get any more asked for interviews. But my agent was Christian based and had been in the business since vaudeville, which, gave her a tremendous amount of experience and connections, and was really an asset. So I've done a few things, to music videos. I was on a TV show called The Secret World of Alex Mack as an extra, and then did some specialty things on that show. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed a lot of the people you meet. It was just some of the circumstances. You just have to be cautious, and you learn to really watch what you are willing to read for and not read for, and put yourself in those situations, because it doesn't take long for Hollywood to categorize people. And it's really hard to get out of those categories, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And just thank you so much for sharing that part. It's one of the things about you, it adds to your list of really unique experiences. And so I want to kind of jump ahead, because there was a lot of life that happened between you being in California and then now you're located in Texas. And can you kind of share with us how you met your husband, Joe, and how you ended up in Texas?
Yeah, that's a fun story. So
I love this story. That's why I'm like, they need to hear it.
If you ask my husband, his short version is that I showed up on his doorstep, that God literally put his wife on his doorstep, which is fairly accurate, minus some of the in-between story. After I gave up my title as Miss Rodeo USA, and while I was waiting to go to law school, I had kind of a summer break in between there, and did some voiceovers and some basically like promotional videos for a Western production company. And my husband's uncle had a cattle roping business at the time, and they had us come out to do a promotional video for them. And I literally, like the first time I saw my husband, he was bringing a bunch of Corriente cattle over a hilltop in Henrietta, Texas. And I had no idea that he would be my person for the rest of my life, but I literally did show up on his doorstep. So it was a blessing.
Yeah. And just, that time that you spent, in Hollywood as a kid, then, your experience through your rodeo queen journey that then brought you there. And literally, like you said, you kind of showed up on your husband's doorstep because you were getting to use some of those same skills with this Western production company. It kind of gives me goosebumps when I think about it, because you guys are, just such important people in mine and my husband's life. The kind of people that I think when we retire one day and our kids are so busy doing things, these are the people we want to spend our time with, And so I'm just so thankful that you had that summer off and got to meet Joe.
Oh, me, I can't imagine. He is definitely the calm in my storm. I can't imagine my life without him. As frustrating as husbands can be sometimes, he really is the calm in my storm. And sometimes we forget that in the busyness of our everyday life. We forget what a blessing that other half is to us. And it's easy to take advantage of that when you have such good husband at home or a good wife at home, vice versa. And so I appreciate people like you who remind me that we are really, truly blessed.
So take us to the next part. You meet Joe Mack, You show up on his doorstep basically. And, at the time, I believe you were still, you were getting ready to go to law school, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So I wasn't interested in looking for a relationship. I had decided I had some really, really good girlfriends of mine, Misty Bonds and Courtney and Kit, that all lived in the Fort Worth area at the time. And I decided that's where I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to kind of stay in the Fort Worth area. I liked that part of Texas. I knew that Tarrant County had a phenomenal DA's office, and I wanted to try to be a part of that. And in order to do that, I really wanted to put my name in that area and start to make connections and network business wise. And so, it wasn't love at first sight. Actually, my husband, I interviewed him in part of the promotional video, and it was so hard to get him to, he wouldn't even talk to me. He didn't even give me like barely one word answers at points in time in the interview. It was really one of the hardest interviews I'd ever done. And I actually thought he was kind of a jerk, but hindsight, he was just super shy, and he was a bit overwhelmed at how fast I could consume information and just regurgitate it out on the video from what his uncle would give me. He would just kind of narrate, these are the things that we're doing, this is how we're doing it. And then we would turn around and we would do some promo shots for those different things. And he was just like, wow, just, you turned all that information into, a little monologue on video. And so I didn't know it at the time, but he was impressed, and that flatters me a lot. But I didn't think he was super friendly. But fast forward to my first semester in law school, I was just finishing final exams. The cutting futurity was going on in Fort Worth. And he had called me and said, hey, my brother and I, a couple of us guys are coming down to Fort Worth to go to the futurity. Do you want to come with us? And I was like, who is this? And so he reminded me who he was. I went, and I had so much fun. I mean, I had laughed so hard that night, which I really, truly needed, because I'd been super stressed. Your first semester of law school, it's kind of a weeding out process. You're either going to sink or swim, and making it through your first set of exams in that semester, it was just super stressful. So I went to the futurity, had a great time being around horses, being around horse people. And they're, my husband and his family, they're so lighthearted. They're they're really just, there's a genuine kindness to his whole family that is hard to explain, but you know it when you're around them. And it was just a lot of fun. I mean, we didn't have a dull moment the whole time. One of their friends was picking up stallion flyers and pretending to sell the stallions to just random people walking by, just out of entertainment. And it was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, it just makes me smile thinking about how just your attitude and can really just kind of change the whole atmosphere. I mean, we know that, but then when you get to be around people like Joe and his family, it just reminds you of how incredible that is.
Yeah, yes. I mean, without a doubt, I definitely fell in love with him that night. Of course, my husband, he's talented. I mean, their whole family has so many talents, but he's talented with a rope. He's talented with a horse, but some people don't know because he is shy. Unless he's been drinking a little too much, he's not going to sing for very many people and play the guitar, but he can play the guitar by ear and sing. And, you know, we all went back to my apartment in Fort Worth where I lived that night, and he pulled out their guitars and they sang and played. And I mean, I just fell in love with him that night. I literally did. I was in awe. And we have been dating ever since. And we actually dated a long time. You know, my husband, I have to thank him for his patience, because I was in law school. And so he dated somebody who did not put him at the top of their priority list at all. You know, if anybody going through any type of, I don't care if it's a trade school or, you know, your graduate schooling or anything like that, that you're super focused, you have a lot of financial investment in that process. If you don't prioritize, you're going to have a hard time succeeding. And for me, I worked with a criminal defense firm in Dallas. I commuted from Fort Worth to Dallas after school, and then I had night classes. And so he was just super patient. And I you know, it was almost the end of my law school career before I actually made it up to Henrietta to visit him and his family here. You know, I mean, he waited for basically 2.5 years before I ever came up here for a date. He always came to me. And looking back, I just can't imagine it working if he expected me to return that investment right away, when he was just so patient with me and understood and really supported me in my law school, you know, studies. Because he really never, I mean, when I had final exams and I said, no, I can't meet y'all, or no, I can't come to that roping, or whatever it was, you know, at Christmas when I'm studying in my books, he would take me up to his uncle's office so I had a quiet spot to study. And, you know, that patience and that grace that he gave me at the front is just such a blessing. And I had no idea at the time, but when you look back at it and you think, would I have been able to do the same thing? You know, sometimes we all have expectations in our relationship, and he was just patient and gave me so much grace. And I can't imagine where we would be if he had not done that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so beautiful, being able to look back on that process. And like you said, it just brings on a whole different level of of deeper appreciation when you think about it. And so Katie, whenever you finished, law school, what was that like? Take us through kind of your next steps of figuring out what you wanted to do with your law degree.
So, you know, I knew from a very young age, I wanted to be an attorney. I have an uncle who was a retired judge. And then my mom, being in the domestic violence realm, she was often going to court and taking victims to court and helping them testify and encouraging them to stand their ground or try to, you know, make sure that they didn't return to that same abusive situation. I learned a lot growing up from my family and the exposure of really my parents giving the shirt off their back for so many different people in our life, that I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew I wanted to be a prosecutor. So going into law school, I had that in my mind. But you really, I mean, you can intern for free with judges and prosecutors' office, but until you actually have at least your student bar card, you really don't get to have a paid internship. So I had to work for a defense firm, and actually that was, you know, God has such a good plan, and we don't see it at the time, but the defense firm I got a good chance to work for was a phenomenal group of attorneys. And I learned a tremendous amount from them on the defense side and how to look at cases and they worked cases all the way through. So they did not just trial work, but they did appellate and writ work. And they do a lot of the capital writs for death row in Texas. And so I had exposure through the whole process, trial, appeal, writs in the defense firm. And that was my first 2 years of law school that I worked for them. And then when I got my third year bar card, I interviewed and I was lucky enough to land a student internship at the DA's office that actually paid because I needed the income. And so I got to start networking in the DA's office. And that was actually, that was what I think started getting my foot in the door by far. Worked for actually one of my mentors. I got placed in her court. That was my first internship. Her name is Christy Jack. She's a phenomenal was a phenomenal prosecutor, is a phenomenal defense attorney now because she's in private practice as well. So getting to intern with her in that third year, and then obviously graduating law school, your main goal is to then sit and pass the bar exam, which is a 3-day exam. And it's literally a beating. I know people that are licensed in multiple states and they sit for multiple bar exams. One bar exam was enough for me. One 3-day exam was plenty. And you basically spend an entire 3-month period in between your graduation of law school and sitting for the bar exam studying, and you spend 8 hours a day. I did not work during that time. I had planned finances and I had the support and help of my family, thank goodness. But I literally studied for the bar exam as if it was a job. I spent 8 to 10 hours a day in our school library studying for the bar exam up until taking it and then taking the bar exam. And actually my husband, he drove me down there and helped me get everything in my room before the bar exam, and then said, I'll come get you when it's over and we'll go to dinner. And so sat for the bar exam. You don't know your results until November. So we sit for the bar exam in July and you get your results in, I think it was November. But in the meantime, you're still active on what's called your student bar card. So your third year student bar card. So I transitioned from my internship to trying to get a spot, one of the coveted spots in the DA's office, and interview to hire on as a misdemeanor attorney at the Tarrant County DA's office. And, what's going through your mind is just how lucky you are to be there. Of course, you're praying that you pass the bar exam, but you don't know. And you're still trying to interview for jobs in the meantime, on the premise that you're going to have a license by the time the bar results come out. And you're just hoping and praying that God's plan is at work in your life in that time.
Oh man, just hearing you describe that, it just seems like an overwhelming amount of unknown and stress. But I can't help but think back, as you and I knew each other at this point when you were going through this process. Oh, yes. And I remember you sharing with me how during the interview process, you got some really great feedback because you had so many kind of unique qualities that some of the other people that were applying for these jobs, or I say qualities, but also like experiences such as being a rodeo queen, that other people didn't have. So can you share with us a little bit about just how you were able to kind of intertwine those stories and share the skill set you had from being a cowgirl and being a promoter of, the Western way of life?
So one thing that, when you're doing, you start to learn to do your resume, when you're in high school and whatever, but in between high school and me graduating law school, there's a lot of years that had surpassed. And I've had the privilege of doing a lot of different jobs. I've worked at a cell phone store. I've worked at a jewelry store. I've worked my way through college, through my undergrad. I did a junior college first, and then I went to college, and then I ended up finishing college in Oklahoma and then applying to law school in Texas. And so in the midst of all that time, I've carried a lot of different titles and jobs and experience. And I really think that all those steps in my life put me in the best position possible and putting those things on my resume that made me stand out, or, that were just different and unique. Because there's nothing wrong with this, but there are a lot of people that go from high school to college to grad school to, to their career. And there's not a lot of life experience in there. And I think when I sat for my job interview at the DA's office, that's one of the questions they ask you is what sets you apart from our other applicants? And my first response is my life experience. I don't know how many applicants can say that, one, I've carried so many different jobs. I've dealt with the public in so many different ways, whether it be being a Miss Radio USA, being a local title holder in the 4-H division, as a kid growing up all the way till I was 18 and graduating from 4-H, working at the different jobs that I worked. All those things gave me a tremendous ability to be able to relate to people in a different way and be able to apply experience to my caseload, which I think makes a huge difference in your ability as not just an attorney, but in your ability as a professional in any industry. Because experience gives you so much more depth, right? I can look at something as an 18-year-old and think XYZ because this is what's black and white on the paper, but I don't have a lot of life experience to read between the lines. Mm-hmm. And when you're older, you have that life experience that gives you a lot bigger story than what you would have had I just, gone through the motions and not taken those wonderful breaks in my life to do all these different goals that I had.
Yeah. And when you said that about how experience gives a person depth, oh, that's so good. You articulated that so well. So you, not to spoil the end of the story, but you did get on with the Tarrant County DA.
Yes, I was very lucky. I started at the bottom of the ladder like everybody else. So I started in what was called the misdemeanor division in Tarrant County. Obviously Tarrant County is a large county. It's Fort Worth, Texas. So we had a lot of courts. We had 10 misdemeanor courts, 10 felony courts, and it was strictly the criminal division that I did. So my goal has always been trial work. I like people. I enjoy people. I always wanted to do trial. All through law school, that was kind of my priority. So I would take the courses or take the professors that were trial attorneys. And so that's why I ended up with a lot of night classes, also because I worked, but those night classes were taught by professors who were still practicing attorneys. And I think that was such an asset because I did some networking, I got great experience, and they helped guide your path towards what you wanted to do, which for me was trial work in the DA's office. And I was lucky to be one of those selected to be hired on and then find out that I actually passed the bar. So be a licensed attorney and proceed to try a numerous amount of cases at the DA's office, and then progress through the ladder from misdemeanor court to felony court trial attorney. And I stayed there for just about 5 years, which I dated my husband through all of that. So again, he traveled a lot to Fort Worth and me not so much here. And at some point we decided in our relationship that obviously we both wanted more. And so I was trying to work my way in that direction. What was I going to do? How was I going to transfer my career here? Would I still practice law here? Would I do, there's a lot of things you can do as a licensed attorney that doesn't necessarily mean practicing law, but for me, that's what I enjoy. I enjoy trial work. And so, a little bit of it was soul searching. Would I be able to do defense work? Because I am a very conservative person by nature. But I think that my exposure related back to when I worked at the defense firm in Dallas, Sorrells, Udishin, and Anton, and they had phenomenal, the partners in that law firm, I still call on them for advice sometimes. They were phenomenal mentors, attorneys, trial lawyers. And so one of those attorneys in that office, I had asked him, when I was getting ready to leave, is what makes it easy for you to do defense work? Because a lot of people see defense attorneys as, bad, or it has a very negative connotation. When people hear you're a criminal defense attorney, they just kind of, oh, okay, and they don't really want to know more. His response was really what the mindset should be of any attorney is, I'm the checks and balances to the system. I'm making sure that person gets the fair trial, that everybody's following the rules in the game. And without a defense attorney that's on their game and making sure everybody else is following the rules, then people are not getting a fair shot. Then it's not innocent until proven guilty. It's, suspected guilty, found guilty. And so with that mindset, I moved from the prosecutor's office, and all that trial experience was tremendously helpful for me to move over here and have my own practice, open up a private criminal defense practice. And in a small town, I do a little bit of everything. I do wills, sometimes I do contracts, I do letters for people, you name it. But primarily I do criminal defense because I enjoy trial work.
Yeah. And until you explained to me, kind of your role, I had that same negative connotation. You watch Law and Order, or you the things that you see that you don't necessarily really understand the whole story. And when you explained it to me, you were the checks and balances for the system. I thought, man, how incredible is that? Because whether it's now, or it's been in our past, or it's a distant family or friend, we all know somebody that has gotten themselves in a bind or been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or, and it's just, when you start thinking about somebody having a vested interest in a person they don't even know, but they've decided to pursue a career to make sure this stranger they don't know gets a fair shot to at least tell their story. That mean they're innocent always, but I just really respect what you do, and being able to open my eyes, is giving me somebody that it's like, okay, this is what that actually means, when you hear the term defense attorney, or a criminal defense attorney.
And when I was at that defense firm, they explained to me, they knew I wanted to be a prosecutor. When I interviewed for them, I told them, my goal was to work at the DA's office in Tarrant County. And so they always knew that throughout my entire time there, but they gave me so much exposure to things. And Bruce Anton, one of the older attorneys, I traveled with him to Houston, to death row, and met with him with all of his clients and stuff. And it opened my eyes as a young person, not quite a licensed attorney, but at the time as a young person. And then getting into the prosecutor's office, I think I definitely carried a little bit different personality than I would have had I not had that experience at the defense firm, because it opened my eyes to the other side of, of these people are people too. And so oftentimes you can, if you're not on that side or never seen that side of the fence, or you don't have much life experience, you cannot relate to that person being a human being. You see them as a criminal, a label, and so it definitely takes some growth from you as a person. Like, I definitely have to step back at times and say, this is what I'm doing, this is what my goals are. But I also have clients who are people that, like you said, they're just people who have had a bump in the road. Maybe they got a DWI, maybe it was something so small, maybe they've lost their job and they stole a steak to feed their family, or they stole some stuff from the Dollar General to feed their family, whatever. I'm not saying it excuses their behavior, but there's a lot of times that there's so much more to the facts than what you read in the offense report, or just in black and white. And then my mom's social work background definitely comes into play, because I get a chance to help these people from a different angle. I get a chance to try to get them back on track, or figure out why this is happening for them. And it doesn't work with all your clients. There's definitely a lot of times that you see your client and you've handled your case is done, and they're still going down that same path. But then there are clients that call me and they say, I'm 2 years sober, and I'm married, and I've started a family. I've had a steady job. My life is so much better. And I just want to thank you for having faith in me and talking to me and being straight with me, and not, not just running me through the system like so many other people would do. And I think that makes a difference. That's really what has carried me through in my last 5 years of private practice, is those, few and far between, but those ones that call you back and say, thank you, that makes a world of difference.
Yeah. You have so much, just hearing you share that. You've got so much passion for what you do, as well as compassion for people. And, I've gotten to be on the receiving end of that as your friend, and I'm so grateful for that. And I know that like time is super valuable, and there's so much more. We're probably going to have to do a second episode just to where we can, share more with people. But, you mentioned you've been in private practice for, over 5 years now. And in that time, you've gotten married, you have 2 small children, continued your practice, and somehow, you're still managing to show up and be a great friend and a wife. And I'm just wondering how do you step away, Katie, from when you have these really heavy cases on you, like emotionally and mentally? How do you step away from work just to be present with family? And then how do you dive back in sometimes?
So I'm human. I don't always step away very well. Some of my bigger cases, they stay with you. I mean, even when you finish the case, whether you've tried it or, something's worked out in a plea agreement or whatever, some of those cases, they weigh with you forever. When I was a prosecutor, I still carry stuff with me from those cases, thoughts, heartbreak for families and people that have lost loved ones, or people that have lost loved ones in the criminal justice system. I would say, when I said that Joe is the calm in my storm, he is a reminder. Every now and then he'll say, "Hey babe, you got to be present with us, put that down. You can come back to that." And I need that, because I can be a workaholic. And so it's been a growth for me to find that balance. But it was harder for me with my first child. Now that I've had a second child and she's 18 months, sometimes you don't have an option. You have to step away. One, because I don't want to miss things. We've worked so hard, my husband and I, in our life to get to the point where we are. We want to be able to take some of those moments and be present for them and remember them. And so that's my reminder, is when, my little one says, "Hey mama, can you come play with me?" And I've been at the computer for the last 3 hours. Yeah, I can. And I'll get back to this. Maybe it means a later night for me on the computer after everybody goes to bed. Maybe it means I get up like I did this morning at 5:30 and start work before everybody wakes up, and I start breakfasts and lunches for school. It just means a balance. And as the mother, and this now, you and I have talked about it, you find a way to be more productive in a shorter period of time. You learn how to really condense, how to simplify some of your things, how to chop things off your list, the harder first, and then the easier things that you can maybe have some leadway on, you might have to push till tomorrow, or you might have to have it, later at night at 10 o'clock, you're writing whatever letter you got to write for somebody. You just learn to be more productive in a shorter period of time as a mom. And sometimes I have a hard time, but my husband's my reminder, that this God and my family, this is why I do everything I do, not the adverse. I don't do everything I do for my work. I do everything I do in my work for my family. And so he's a good reminder that I need to step away sometimes and just be there with my family.
Oh, so good, Katie. I feel like you just gave some incredible advice right there. But to anybody who's not in the mom chapter yet, because I find myself, sharing stuff from that angle now, because that's the season of life I'm in. But yes, if you could go back and, share with your 18, 20-year-old self and any of the listeners that are there, what advice would you give yourself?
So probably the advice that I get from my mom and dad, and always have in my life, that don't let any label or anybody's cautionary statements keep you from doing what you want to do. Throughout my whole life, having done some acting in Hollywood, having done, 4-H, FFA, working at all of the jobs that I've done, and then carrying the titles that I carried as a queen, and then carrying titles in my professional career, had I let people's cautionary advice stop me or deter me from doing what I really, really wanted to do, I would not have experienced so many of the great things in my life. I wouldn't have met my husband. I wouldn't have been a prosecutor in Tarrant County. I wouldn't now have my own law practice, because people can say, it's little things like, oh, you're not from Fort Worth. You don't really have any Fort Worth relatives in the DA's office. You're not going to get in there. They don't know who you are. Or you're not from this small town. So when you open a practice, they're going to go to so-and-so down the road whose father was an attorney here. If I let all that cautionary advice dampen the path that I took, I would never be where I'm at. And I've had failures. And that's one thing that I would remind my 18 or 21-year-old self is, I made mistakes all through life as a young person, as a rodeo queen, as a professional in the DA's office, and now as a professional on my own. I don't have all the answers, and I'm far, far from perfect. I definitely will make my mistakes, but I'm not afraid to make them. And that, I think, is the difference between me now and me at 18, is like some hesitation I had in my life. And if it wasn't for my parents standing behind me saying, don't listen to them, that doesn't matter. What do you want to do? We are behind you. I had that support system, and I know that everybody doesn't. Surround yourself with the people who will support you. If it's not at home, find it in your friends, find it in your mentors. There will be people out there that will push you in that direction and will not let everybody else's negativity get in your way.
I'm smiling so big right now. I just want to be like, preach it from like the mountaintops. Like everybody needs to hear that message. So, Katie, thank you so much. We're going to kind of wrap up with these last few questions. I like to ask everybody that comes on the podcast. So what is the wildest thing in your travels and, being a cowgirl and now mom life that you've had to fix on the fly with either bungee cords, baling wire, or duct tape?
Ooh, so actually, when we were hauling out to Miss Rodeo USA to compete, my dad and we got a flat tire and it damaged the fender on the trailer. So we had to use duct tape to help the fender on the trailer. And then most recently, as a mama, I have had to zip tie my fender on my SUV because I backed into my husband's flatbed trailer. Yes, I did. See, I say we all make mistakes. I'm still making mistakes. Backed into my husband's flatbed trailer. Thank God his trailer was okay. But I tore my fender off my car. And so I had to use zip ties to put the fender back on so I could go about my business and take care of the things I needed to do. So you never get over zip ties, duct tape, baling wire, you name it. We use it for all kinds of things.
Yeah. You just got to always be prepared. I love that. Okay, Katie, this podcast is dedicated to just really sharing the idea of how important it is for women to embrace the cowgirl state of mind, whether they've never, had the opportunity to swing their leg over a horse, or they've gotten to grow up around horses in the Western industry, like ourselves. So what does the phrase cowgirl state of mind mean to you?
All right. So the phrase, the first thing that came to my mind was the picture of my mom, the picture of my mother-in-law, picture of those strong women in my life that are fierce in every way and shape and form, and not fierce as in hard to deal with or harsh, but fierce in life. They just take things head on. They are not deterred by, letdowns or obstacles of any kind or shape, and they still give the shirts off their back to anybody who needs it. And I think that that's what it brings to my mind, is that kind of that loyalty, that dedication, that fierceness, that inner strength that is indescribable. And it doesn't have to come from being a horse person. My mom was not raised with horses. She didn't have horses until she was an adult, and I was blessed to be raised with them. But that fierceness in my mom came from, so many other things in her life. And albeit she didn't have horses, she was always a cowgirl at heart. She loved horses from a very young age. She was always that epitome of what I see when you talk about the cowgirl state of mind. It's just that strength, that fierceness, that loyalty, and that genuine kindness, that it doesn't matter who you are, what path you've come from, they're going to help you continue your journey one way or another. And it might take their last dollar to do it, but they will.
I feel like you just described yourself. I mean, I just, and I couldn't agree with you.
I'm working at it. I'm hoping to be, a woman like my mother someday. Absolutely. That's definitely a goal of mine.
Yeah, I can assure you, you are, I feel like you're there, but I'll just say you're well on your way to being that woman that you just described, that cowgirl. So, Katie, thank you so much. It's such a treat us getting to catch up.
I've loved it.
I know. I've so enjoyed it. Can you tell everybody, where they could go to kind of follow along if they're needing some attorney help, and they're in your area? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, my law firm is the Woods firm, and it has a Facebook page. And then, because what doesn't have a Facebook page these days?
Right.
I also have a Facebook page. My name on my Facebook is, I think, Katie Woods Boggeman, because they don't let you take off your old last name. So I just added my new last name, and it's Boggeman. And then, as always, shoot me a message on there, and I'd be glad to give them my email or my phone number, whatever they need. If they just want to chat or they want to ask questions, I'm always an open door. And people that are interested in law school or people that are interested in horses or both, please, I'd be glad to help you on your journey.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'll be sure to put that contact information in the show notes, so everybody, you can go check there as well to find that. And Katie, just thank you again.
Thank you for having me. I love your podcast. You are actually the first podcast that I've ever listened to more regular. And so I'm super excited, and I'm so proud of you. And you really are. I know you say that you always look up to so many people, but you're such a jewel in this world. And I'm so proud to call you my friend.
Oh, thank you. Okay. We're going to have to get off here, and then you stay on so we can cry
Okay.
Toast to that. So, thank you for such a genuine compliment. And I thank all of you for listening. I'm glad you got to meet my dear friend, Katie Woods Boggeman. Thank you for spending your time with me on the Cowgirl Confessions podcast. I'm so glad y'all stopped by. If you could take a moment to share this episode and tag us on social media, I'd be happier than a cowgirl in a sea of buy one, get one vintage turquoise. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode. New episodes will be released bi-monthly. Please leave us a review if you feel so led by going to iTunes. Your feedback will really help us breed the idea of grabbing life by the horns with a cowgirl state of mind into women across the globe. Some that may have never even had the privilege to throw their leg over a horse, but could most certainly use the cowgirl state of mind while navigating life. Thanks again, y'all. Until next time, keep pursuing your dreams with that all go and no woe mentality. Remember, you're writing a story that's worth saddling up for, sister.